you all so much. It's so wonderful to be with all of you here. And my only sadness is I wish I could give everybody a hug, as I'm sure that we all do. And the great educator, Janetta B. Cole, former president of Spelman College, the former president of Bennett College, once shared the proverb with me that if you lift up the name of an ancestor, that ancestor will never die. I'd like to begin by lifting up the name of Ida B. Wells. I'd like to begin by lifting up the name of Allison Dunnigan, the first Black woman to receive White House credentials and to be a member of the House and Senate press galleries. I'd like to begin, of course, last but certainly not least, by lifting up the name of Gwen Ifill, our dear sister, whose birthday we would be celebrating next week, and we can still celebrate her. So with that being said, welcome to all of you. Thank you all so much for being here and for being part of this magnificent legacy. And I just wanted to start by asking each of you, whose name comes to mind when you think of your mentor, the person who got you kind of launched on the journey that you are on now? And if you don't mind, I will start. In my case, it was Melba Tolliver, who thankfully is still with us. She was the first Black woman to be a network O&O owned and operated correspondent at WABC in New York. And remember this, I was 9 when this happened, but Melba was taken off the air because she went on vacation and came back with her hair natural. And the network at the time took her off the air, saying that this was a radical hairstyle and this was not going to be tolerated. So pickets ensued, led by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, picketed outside WABC for 10 days until they put Melba Tolliver on the air. I then, because at that time, my mom had made the mistake of letting me go to the hairdresser by herself, promptly went to the hairdresser and had the process cut out of my hair and came home with my first fro, my first natural hair, which I have worn ever since. My mother was not pleased. For weeks afterwards, she would pull at my hair saying, "Lord Jesus," and I had to keep reminding her that I cut it. It just does grow. But that is my Shiro, who kind of led me on this path of wanting to be who I am today. Michelle, who do you remember who led you on the path to being who, or what led you on the path to being who you are today?
Well, there are many people. And first of all, thank you so much for putting this panel together, Michelle. I too wish we could be together and give each other high fives and hand slaps and hugs. And eventually we'll get to that point where we can do that. But I have benefited from the mentorship from many people. I see someone in the chat also lifted up Carol Simpson at ABC News, Dorothy Gilliam, the first time I worked at the Washington Post. But the person who was my most consistent mentor is the person for which this award was named, and that's Gwen Ifill. And I had the benefit of having someone who was my mentor and my closest friend. And she mentored, one of the things about Gwen is that she mentored young people, but she also did a lot of mid-career mentoring, helping people find their way in an industry as it was going through a lot of change. And I've told this story many times. When I first went to the Washington Post, Gwen saw me across the room, recognized me from NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists, and pulled me aside before I was going in to have an interview with Milton Coleman, Michelle, a name you will remember, and said, make sure that you ask for more money than you were intending to ask for, because that's what the white boys do. And, and I straightened myself up and I went in that room and I asked for more money, and I didn't get everything I asked for, but I got a lot more than I would have. And she, throughout my career, and I still hear her voice in my head, is always encouraging me to ask for more of life, ask for more of the industry, and also to ask for more of myself. Mentoring was so important to Gwen, and she did it in very formal ways, but very informal ways. And I bet that most of the people on this panel have benefited from her mentorship as well.
Nikole Hannah Jones, what about you? Who or what helped you launch you on the path that you're on today? Nikole, you're still muted. We cannot have that.
You would think at this stage in the pandemic, we would not have people speaking on mute, but I swear to God, every one of these you have to have.
But we need everybody unmuted. So.
I've gotten it out of the way, so everyone else should be good now. I just was going to say how amazing it is to be on a panel with all of you amazing Black women journalists. Like, it's just a dream. And God, yeah, if we were in person, it would just it would be everything. So we have to like redo this at some point in real life. So, you know, I was sitting here thinking of my mentors, and of course, I've had lots of mentors, many of them actually Black men. I didn't have a lot of chances to work around Black women who were in positions of authority. And often I didn't have other Black women journalists who weren't younger than me or my same age when I was in newsrooms, because I was, you know, I was a beat reporter. I was scattered in places like Durham, North Carolina, like the Portland Oregonian. I didn't come up in journalism in Washington or DC, or these places that had, you know, a significant amount of Black women in leadership roles. But when I think about
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, frozen. Okay, Nikole, you are frozen.
when I got there,
Hey,
and she was just one of those Black women who had fought really hard. I'm frozen. Oh,
oh, you're
We can hear you
unfrozen.
now.
am I still frozen?
We missed the name.
Sorry,
that
I'm in a hotel. All I have is hotel Wi-Fi, so I apologize. I'm on the
just
road.
repeat the name. The name was the one thing we didn't get.
Okay, Renee Mitchell at the Oregonian. She was a columnist, longtime columnist at the Oregonian, trailblazer, fought really hard. And much like you, Michelle, she gave me that real Black woman advice about how to go in those rooms and fight for myself and what was likely going to be the outcome, that if I fought for myself, it might make things harder for me, but I couldn't sell myself out even if it made things harder. So I uplift her. And of course, you know, many Black women along the way who weren't in positions to necessarily open doors for me because they weren't in leadership roles, but they certainly guided and mentored me as I was coming up.
Karen, what about you? Who or what launched you on this path to being who you are?
Delighted to be here. I believe it or not, it's my mom. Having always done business news, my mother was an executive with AT&T, and I grew up in a home where I was around business news in the stock market, and I just understood things about business before I landed my first real job at CBS and then CNBC. She was the person that I went to when I wanted to figure out how to navigate those spaces and places where I was the only one. And so she was just instrumental in helping me kind of figure out what to say, when to say it, how to phrase things, what to expect. And I think also being immigrants to this country was also very informative as well. That whole experience of leaving the Caribbean, then moving to England, and then coming to America in the 1960s also really helped inform my worldview and how I approached work.
May we know her name? May we know your mother's name so we can lift up?
Thank you. Her name was Elvina Birmingham Toulon.
Wonderful. Yamiche, what about you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for including me in this and for gathering us. This is it's just beautiful to be here. And I should say I'm trying not to cry because I feel like from the very beginning of this, it felt spiritual. It felt like this was a special gathering, even on Zoom, because I think you were just lifting up people's names that mean so much to us as women. You know, I'm lucky because I feel like I sit at a lot of your knees. Honestly, I feel like, you know, I have so many mentors and I'm so lucky about that. I mean, I think I've called for sure Michelle and Nikole with real life questions like how to stay safe and what should I do? And I'm having a hard day. So how do I just muscle through and how do I let myself just be me? I think that I've been really lucky that the people that I'm talking to, I think are some of my biggest mentors. But I would say the two women that probably have impacted my life the most are my grandmother and my mother. They came here in the 1970s from Haiti, and they were women who were fierce. They started off working at McDonald's, and my mom has 2 PhDs now, and she really just instilled in me this confidence that I was always enough, that I was always capable of doing whatever I put my mind to. My grandmother, she learned English in her 70s. And for me, she would look at me and I knew that I was my ancestor's wildest dream because I could meet and sit at the knee of my ancestor and know that I am why she risked her life and came here fleeing a dictator, having been jailed by a dictator in Haiti. So to me, those two women, they formed this woman to be confident and to just not believe anything negative that people would say about me. And I think that that's carried me through. My mom was a social worker for 3 decades. And as much as I don't really have any journalists in my family, I was able to go to Take Your Child to Work Day with my mom and see how empathetic she was to people, to go into people's houses, to put them at ease, to ask them tough questions. Those are the I would say that those skills are probably the most directly tied to the work that I do now. When every interview that I do, I think about my mom, because I remember my mom going in and being very humble and never feeling like she was better than people, never feeling like people owed her anything. She always came in with, I think, an empathetic heart. So for me, long before I even knew I wanted to be a journalist, I knew I could just do anything. And my mom has been my biggest champion. She's also, I should say, you know, the person who's been the angriest at times. I have to call my mom. People will call me when something crazy happens, if the president yells at me, and I'll have to call my mama, because I know my mom is the one who's pacing and doing doing circles, because she feels things so deeply. So I grew up feeling deeply loved. And I know that that is a blessing in and of itself, to know that my mother feels everything that I feel, almost doubly. So I would say that in my journey of just becoming who I am, my mom and my grandmother were just central.
And may we know her name?
So my mother's name is Yamiche Alcindor. I'm basically a junior. She made my name up. And then my grandmother's name is Pauline Leon Alcindor. I'm named after her. My middle name is her middle name.
Wow, that's wonderful. Let us hear those names. Let us hear those names. Let us speak our names, because so much of the history of this country has been to erase our names and our personhood and our fact of being here. Let us speak our names when we can. Having said that, you know, I think I can speak for all of us when I say I think we all feel tremendously honored to be part of a field that allows us to speak truth to power, and that allows us to tell the stories of our people and all peoples. But this is also a field, and let's just be honest, that will break your heart. And I just wanted to ask each of you, if you don't mind sharing, what is the thing about this thing called journalism that has broken your heart? And how have you dealt with that? And for many of you, I think I know, but I don't want to assume. So who wants to start? Karen. Okay, go ahead, Yamiche.
I was going to just say, I interviewed Nikole for the Texas Tribune Festival, and she said something that stuck with me. Well, Nikole says a lot of things that stick with me, but this particular thing is sticking with me. And it was that she's often underestimated. And I think that that's the thing. When she said that, I was like, oh, that's what the name of that thing is, when people have consistently been like, we don't think you're good enough. So I would say consistently from the very beginning of my journalism experience, people have underestimated me. And that's kind of broken my heart. When I think about one of my internships at a major newspaper, they were like, you write really well. You're better than the kids at Howard. And I said, well, I didn't go to Howard. I went to Georgetown. They're like, you know what I mean. And it kind of dawned on me that the entire time they were thinking that I was mediocre, and that I was sort of surprising people by being able to write. And that to me sort of broke my heart. And I know I've consistently been told I won't say consistent, I've been told by more than one person when I was starting in TV and thinking about TV, well, you're gonna have to change your hair. You're gonna have to, you don't look, you're not skinny enough. You're not pretty enough. You should never let your arms show because they are fat. I mean, these are the things that I've literally been told in professional meetings with people. And I had to just tell myself, well, my mom thinks I'm beautiful, and my mom thinks I'm capable of anything. So I'm just going to ignore this and keep going. And there's Michele Norris, you know this person. Athalia Knight is someone who was a good friend of Gwen Ifill's, who I call my journalism mom. And I've called her countless times, like crying in a car, being like, this person told me I don't fit in this newsroom. I don't look confident enough. And she would just tell me, put your head down and be too busy to work, be too busy to be thinking about what people think about you. So I think that's helped me kind of consistently deal with the idea that people are underestimating me and thinking that I can't do. And I would say that's true even now. And I think I think Nikole said that, and it struck me, because I think even with Nikole being as amazing as she is, people underestimate her. And I think that is something that I also definitely find true even today.
It's funny because you mentioned Athalia. At the beginning of our conversation, I was speaking of those who have left us and have moved on to the ancestors. But Athalia was very much on my mind, because when I started at the Washington Post as an intern, Milton Coleman, who Michel just pointed out, was the city editor then. And he said, you want to follow Athalia Knight. But I didn't realize he didn't mean that literally. So I literally would follow her around. the newsroom, which is okay. She kind of let me stay, and so we continue to be friends. So it is such a powerful point. I mean, but then your scar becomes your superpower, right? Being underestimated becomes the very thing that allows you to excel. Karen, what about you? What is the thing about this field that has broken your heart, and how have you dealt with it?
I think it's the relentless need to be, I don't want to say perfect, but you just really can't have a slip up, right? And so, not that I've had any significant ones, but just that sense that you always have to be proving yourself constantly. And after 30 something years, it can get tiring. But I think that's probably it. It doesn't happen as much now, but I think historically that's it. Just that relentless proving of self. Haven't we done this before? We know that I can do this, but it comes back again and again. I think that's it.
And how have you dealt with that, Karen?
A circle of friends and family that validate my existence, believing that my work is good, just having that sense of confidence. And I think that's something I get from my parents as well. Just I'm the best person that I can be, and that certainly is good enough for me. It's going to have to be good enough for the world.
Nikole, what about you? Gosh, there's so many things that fortunately or unfortunately, so many of the heartbreaks of yours have played out publicly. And I, just like Yamiche's mom has been pacing the room, yelling at the TV or whatever, I can assure you that all of us here, and certainly many of those folks listening out there, have been pacing the room and yelling at the TV on your behalf. I'm sure that I can say that with assurance. But what about you, Nikole? What about this field has broken your heart, and what has allowed you to persist?
Well, thank you. And trust me, I have felt that. I felt the love. I'm not a praying woman, but I felt the prayers. And I've said kind of constantly, it has been Black women in particular that have, straightened my spine during those moments and provided me strength and just grace. I also just want to say to Yamiche, because I love you so much, like it just breaks my heart that I'm not surprised people would say these things to you, but it breaks my heart that they do. I've told you this more than one time, like you being on television sends such a powerful message to our Black girls who don't think someone who looks like us can be on television, and that my own daughter, I've passed on to you how powerful it was for my own daughter to see you standing up and being your whole Black woman self on TV and particularly in the face of a white nationalist president. So I just hope you know that we don't see you that way, and the people who matter don't see you that way. And I'm just grateful for you. So what breaks my heart, I feel like this industry has been breaking my heart the entire time I've been in the industry, but I think the thing that breaks my heart the most is we don't learn. You just see the same patterns and mistakes being repeated again and again, and Black journalists, other marginalized journalists continue to try to be kind of the clarion call about what's happening in our country, how we're failing in our coverage, and we don't get listened to, and we get marginalized, and people suffer for that. It's not without consequences that our industry does not learn, and that our industry cannot seem to see the country that we actually live in, and that those of us who try to show that to our country can often find ourselves marginalized in our own newsroom. I haven't felt that our industry has had my back in many ways. And I've felt in some ways that many people are rooting for my failure. So what motivates me is what has always motivated me. I mean, this is what Yamiche and I talked about for the Texas Tribune. Look, people's low expectations have been my motivation. I will always prove you wrong. You don't understand what motivates me. You don't understand my work ethic. You don't understand my mind. And I just use people's low expectations. I have since I was a second grader, being bused into white schools where they didn't think I belonged, to every elite white institution I've ever been in, that I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to do it 100% without selling myself out one bit.
Michelle, I came to you last in part because you've packed so much to your career as a storyteller in newspapers, and then of course in television, and then of course at NPR, where you specialize both in the sort of breaking news, but also those kind of long form projects. And you have essentially created a new form of kind of journalistic storytelling in the Race Card Project. So I'm interested in that, like in what has kind of motivated those moves and those changes to various types of storytelling and journalism. But I want to start with that question: is what has broken your heart, and how have you persisted? And you're muted. We don't need you muted. You got to unmute.
I didn't even know how that happened. I think a gremlin walked in the room and touched the button. I don't remember doing it. But this industry will lift you up, but it can also, it feels like it can take your heart, put it on the ground and stomp on it, on shattered glass. And I'm fortunate that I've had people who have lifted me up throughout that. But when you asked that question, Michelle, the word that came to my mind was erasure. Mm-hmm. You can feel like you are being erased even while you are in the room, that your voice is not being heard, that your opinion does not count, that your analysis is not embraced, that your future is not imagined, that certain people walk in the room and they automatically are seen as management material. They're automatically seen, oh, we need to send him to the Paris Bureau one day, or we need to make sure that he punches the card and goes to London because we think he should be on the masthead. And there's a failure of imagination where we often are concerned, women of color particularly, but women also, where they don't see that in us and they erase a part of us. And so for me, that is one of the things that has been heartbreaking. Or when you leave an institution and your contributions are automatically erased. Mm. And when you talk about moving from one place to another, I have been fortunate that I've been able to apply this craft in several newsrooms and across several genres. But oftentimes I felt like I am stepping out in a boat of my own making. And we've all called out our mothers here. I will call out mine, Betty Norris, who always told me, don't wait for someone to bring you flowers, plant your own garden. Mm. And I took that both literally and figuratively. Many of you have seen I am a gardener and I have a big garden, but I also understood the metaphor in that you have to find your own, you have to hype yourself up and surround yourself with people who believe in you, and then figure out how to ignore those who don't. And sometimes you have to make your own way. And that can be extremely exhausting. But at the same time, if you work out, you know that that's how you build muscle, that you find your stride when you have to run uphill. And I like to think that I've built some of those muscles, but it is hard and it is heartbreaking. And one of the things that I've tried to do at this stage in my career, because for a long time I felt like I was just keeping my head above water, that now, when you talk about mentorship, I felt like I didn't always have the energy to do that when I was younger and just trying to stay in the business and trying to raise children and trying to travel around the country. And now I will call out another name, and that's Anna Julia Cooper, who said, where and when I enter in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood without violence and without suing or special patronage, then and there, the whole Negro race enters with me. I feel that way particularly about my people and about my gender. And so now in everything I do, I try to make sure that I am opening paths for other people, because I know that what I'm feeling, I didn't talk about that a long time, because that you're like a duck and you're paddling underwater, but on the surface you look smooth. And now that I'm willing to talk about it, I'm willing to also see that in other people and try to make sure that to the extent that I can, that I'm lifting while I climb.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you pointed out about being a mother. I have to tell you that I have never had as many fights, nor have I ever felt as marginalized as when I became a mother. In addition to being, a woman of color, being a mother as another layer to, it's almost as if, as a very wise person in my life said to me, it's almost like, you're supposed to take care of everybody else. And how dare you be taking care of these people who are uniquely your responsibility to take care of? Like, how dare you? you know, and so I'm glad that you sort of mentioned it. I do want to point out that we do invite the questions of the audience, and we would love it if you would participate in our conversation. We're already starting to get questions and comments through the chat and also through the question function. And so I'll start with the first one is, what do you say to young women of color about being the loudest voices to have issues affecting us in a newsroom addressed? Oftentimes you have to be the loudest to be able to get issues you care about addressed. And I think, Nikole, you mentioned this, that sometimes carries a cost. The fact of having to be, I mean, one notices that certain people never have to raise their voice and somehow are still heard, but those who do raise their voices are sometimes often criticized for doing so. So Nikole, perhaps you want to take that one, how you've navigated that.
Well, so I guess I'm not sure if the question is asking for advice or just, you know, asking for affirmation, because we do know that, of course, this is the role that we play in newsrooms. And I don't think any of us enter the profession, at least not most of us, presuming that we're going to be able to go through our newsrooms the same way as someone who's not a Black woman. I think I knew going in that I was going to have to challenge coverage, that I was going to have to speak up, that I was going to have to push them on who they were hiring, because the reason I became a journalist was I didn't like the way our communities were being covered. So I came into the industry knowing that there were issues and that I was going to have to play more than a role of just a journalist, just someone who was working on my own beat and my own stories. Now, that's unfair, of course, but I feel like everything about being Black in America is unfair, and we just understand the burden that we have to take on. So what I'll say is, I had to learn, I think, which we all do, when to speak up. Every single day, I read something that I could speak up about, but it's not, effective, I think, to challenge every day. I think you have to decide what is worth the fight and what is not. And then you have to make a calculation with yourself about what you're willing to give up to be that voice in the newsroom, because a lot of people look at my career now, but I'm 45 years old. It took a long time for me to get here. It took longer for me to get here than people who weren't as vocal as I was. And it certainly wasn't inevitable that I would get here at all because I was so vocal. So you have to decide what it's worth. But for me, I had to look at myself. I had to live with myself. And silence was more difficult and unacceptable than the ramifications I was paying in my career. But I certainly paid them.
Karen, I'd love to hear from you on this as a person who has worked transnationally in lots of different contexts, culturally as well as politically, and also as a person who's managed teams and been a team leader. I'd love to hear how you've navigated that.
Gosh, it really is it's choosing your battles, having a long game, not trying to score immediate points, but really thinking about what is it that you're trying to achieve. Is it a type of coverage? Is it a shift in perspective? And just thinking through before you actually speak, and anticipating as much as you can what the cost will be, and is it worth it? And again, having that long game. I think that's so very, very important. What is it that you want? It's not about not about getting your feelings hurt or just trying to score immediate points, but really thinking through what are you trying to achieve, and that's what I keep focused on always. The end game.
Michelle, you wanted to share something?
I just want to, as I'm listening to this, to the extent that the woman who asked this question was asking advice, I'm thinking about the advice that I got from another person who lifts me up, and that's Lisa P. Jackson, who's now at Apple. And she gave me two wonderful pieces of advice. And if you are speaking up and you're not being heard, even in her elevated position, this sometimes happens. And she says that she flips it on the audience, which is usually an audience of men, which is usually an audience of white men. Why is it that you're not hearing me? And then don't say anything else. Just leave it to them to answer the question. And if you do speak up repeatedly and you're labeled as someone who's angry or a little bit strident, or a shill in some way, she says she inoculates herself against that when people say that she's angry, she said, I want you to take a moment and not focus on my anger, but ask yourself why I might be angry. And then again, step back out of it and ask them to sort of think about why is it that they reach for that label? And why is it that perhaps you might be angry, and that anger might be justified? It might be righteous. It might be the kind of anger that if you leaned into it would help the organization as a whole be better and truly more representative. And those are, I have put that in my back pocket, and I have pulled it out on more than one occasion. So I just wanted to share that.
That's great. There's a question about, there's actually several questions about journalists leaving the field. Journalists in general leaving the field, journalism outlets in general diminishing in size or losing people. But then there's also a question about Black women journalists who want to leave, or should they stay or should they go? Why or why not? Who wishes to answer that? I mean, it's such an individual and sort of personal question, isn't it? Because at every turn, just like Karen and several of you were saying, each of us has to do our own sort of personal calculus around those kinds of decisions. But if anyone doesn't mind sharing, could you talk a little bit about what calculus you would want people to employ for themselves as they weigh something like that?
I think it's such a hard question to answer, because you don't know the individual circumstance or of a person, or why they got into journalism, or why they might be thinking about leaving journalism, and all of that depends. You know, like I said, I was almost pushed out of the industry 10 years ago, and it was an extremely toxic work environment for me. I was depressed. I was struggling mentally being there. And the only reason I didn't leave was I couldn't imagine myself being anything else. Journalism it's not truly not an occupation for me. It is a calling. It's my purpose. And if that's the case, then you have to figure it out. Maybe it's not leaving the industry. Maybe it's leaving the work environment that you're in. But if you don't feel like this is what you have to do to breathe, then that's a different calculation. And you know, maybe you're struggling to make ends meet because you're having to freelance because you don't have full-time employment, or maybe, you know, you're not able to get the traction in your career that you wanted, and at some point you have to cut bait. But it's a difficult question. What I will say, if anything, if you learn anything from what happened with the University of North Carolina experiences, we don't deserve to be treated as if we're lucky to be in the places that we're in. We don't need to be treated as charity cases, as if someone did us a favor by allowing us to work for them. You do have to know your worth and what you bring to any institution, and then decide, is that institution worthy of you being there? And if it's not, then you have to find something else.
Anyone else want to share? There's a question about, and feel free to jump in at any time. There's a question about helping women in other countries. Is there? I mean, there's the way this question is phrased is a bit of judgment, and so I'm kind of editing as I go, just because one of the things that Michele was just talking about is that there are stages in your life when you have the bandwidth to do certain things, and there are stages in your life when you don't. And but there is a question about how do we go about supporting women in other countries?
Now I'm over here looking for this question so I can see the judgment.
Well, I mean, I feel like there's a bit of judgment. As a person who's got 2 high school seniors trying to navigate college, and I can't tell you how many worthy things I have turned down just this week. This is the only thing outside of my paid employment and attending to my children that I am doing this week, because they are at a point in their lives where I feel like they should come first. But there is that, you know, so. But a lot of you have worked transnationally. Many of us here have worked sort of transnationally, internationally. What are your thoughts about that? How we can support our colleagues working around the world in circumstances that are equally difficult, or if not more so, not just emotionally difficult, but also physically dangerous. I mean, I do think that's something we need to keep at the forefront. Would anyone like to participate? I know, Karen, you've worked around the world. I think the rest of us.
I've been based in New York, but I have, because of working here at Bloomberg, we are so international, just working with our reporters around the world. I think, there are a couple of things that you can do. And I too had have 2 children who are now almost grown, but somehow still on the books, who, I think that, through work, reaching out, especially being in New York, reaching out to those reporters in other countries and other bureaus, figuring out a way of elevating their work and lifting them up. And so one of the things I did here was a video series where I would interview reporters about their stories. These are reporters in Africa or Asia, and it would give their work just a little bit more daylight. And I would think that would help them not only with the work they're doing for us, but also women journalists in their home countries will also see what they're doing and see that there's a way forward. There's a way of progressing and using social media to advance their work. And then being involved in boards that do work and support women journalists around the world, I think is very important. And then finally, there's so many people who are international, who are right here in a lot of our newsrooms. And if you just talk to them and find out where what their interests are, you can often help make those connections, because often they're here for a couple of years, but they will potentially go back home. So it's all of the above. You just have to do all of it.
It seems like we should remember the organization that convened all of us also, and to support an organization like this, and to help, Karen, you used the word elevate, to help elevate women's voices. And to the extent that you are involved in shaping news coverage, if you are an editor, if you are a host and you're deciding who you're going to put in the chair, often when we're reaching overseas for voices, you said it's 4%, I would say it's 99% of those voices are men. Why is that always the case? Can we find a woman who could help us understand what's happening and name the region or name the part of the country, to continue to push for that and to be the voice in the newsroom that pushes for that? And Karen, I just want to say that I too have adult children, and I'm on team on the books also. So I understand that.
I'd probably add one thing, or a couple things, which is, I think the way to also elevate women is to just recognize their work. It's in some ways echoing what Karen and Michelle just said. It's really sort of leaning in, because some of the biggest stories that are going on right now, you think of Afghanistan, you think of the crisis in Haiti, you think of the Middle East. There are so many women who are doing amazing work, so many women who are freelancing or who are doing international work. I think obviously this organization funds a lot of the work that women around the world do. So I know for me, one of the beautiful things that I've discovered with Washington Week is I sort of have this power to put people on TV that I think maybe don't always get a chance to be on TV. So to me, that's been really, really a special part of it. So being able to elevate women of color, being able to have them at the table, being able to kind of do away with the idea that, well, if we want a strong person with an expertise, he has to likely be a man. It's like, no, this 27-year-old woman who is covering this from Afghanistan, she also too can be just as great as this other man who's written 2 books on the subject. We can have them all sitting at the same table and making them equal. So I think there's a little bit of what I think it's what Michelle alluded to. It's, for me, looking at where you can sort of recognize people, and where you can, even if it's a retweet, where you can sort of lend just an eye to what's going on. Because I think, especially as young women, as a young woman, I find, as now that I'm in these conversations about who is the expert and who, like being able to be on the other side of it, you're like, oh, this is how conversations go. This is how people end up with the same sort of faces on TV. And I've been lucky that I've been given these opportunities as a young woman who I feel like is still fairly early in my career, to be able to sit at these tables. So I think it's really trying to find a seat at the table for another woman. And that can be, I think, in all sorts of regards.
You have to.
I just wanted to add briefly to this, is that sometimes it's encouraging other women to see their own value. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to book authors, scholars, junior scholars who don't have the big name, who aren't the department chair, for a role. And often, I will tell you, this is the truth, they will deflect and they will say, well, oh, I'm not the expert in this, or this other person is better at this than I am. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, own your own expertise. Push the person to not sort of accede to that cultural conditioning that says that I have to be better than good. Because I can tell you, and I don't mean to be sexist or unfair to anybody here, but many times I will ask a woman to consider being interviewed, and that person will deflect to a colleague. Whereas if I call a man, they'll say, what time, where do I need to wear, and what are we talking about? So sometimes it's as simple as encouraging other women to see themselves as being of worth. And the other thing I would say is give women a chance to mess up. Why do women have to be perfect to be adequate? Okay. Because give people a second chance. I mean, oftentimes people are given an opportunity to appear on a program or to do an interview. They aren't used to doing it. They aren't as experienced. They haven't been cultivated in the same, as Michele was saying. Give people at least 2 chances to screw up before you write them off as not being adequate. Because one of the things I've observed is that often women aren't given those opportunities to get good, and then they're written off as not good when other people don't have to be perfect to be considered adequate. So those are that's my kind of, sort of charge to us.
Thank you for saying that, because there are studies that show that all kinds of in the business world that men, when people look at men, they look at potential. And when they look at women, they look for experience. And then women sometimes do that to themselves. I mean, I know that when we're commissioning editorials at the Washington Post, people will say, well, I need to do these 3 things before I feel like I can write on the subject. And as you noted, you'll talk to a man and he'll be like, I can count to 3. When do we start? And we need to really shift that paradigm and help people figure out how they can see their worth and step up and step into opportunity.
We have a program here where it's called New Voices, and we do exactly that. We reach out to women around the world who are in finance and other related industries and put them through a program of public speaking and training and interviewing skills, et cetera, because we were finding people were deflecting. And it really has helped, but it's very intentional. It isn't just, we think it's a nice thing to do. It's tracked, it's measured, to help women know you can't just say no all the time, and we'll give you the skills. And we don't care if you come back on and talk to only us. We just want voices out there. Right. So I think having programs in place is essential.
We have a number of really important, powerful questions that we just simply aren't going to have time to give justice to. Many of them speak to internal dynamics among ourselves that have been hurtful. Questions around being discouraged from working at Black-owned or Black-led publications, for example. Questions about feeling a sense of exclusion by other Black women in our workplaces. And so these are some really profound questions. We're not going to have a chance to answer all of them today, especially because I want to give us each time to conclude our own sort of thoughts. So I'll just finish with one question. This is the last question that I'll ask here today before I turn to a closing thought, which is, how do you manage imposter syndrome in newsrooms where there's less support and mentorship? Who would like to answer that question? Is anybody going to admit that they have it?
I guess I can speak up to, because I feel like you also talked about this, the powerful questions that we're not going to get to. I think that the thing that I would say is that you just have to find your people, right? So I think that I definitely have had the experience where some Black women are not as supportive or don't want to be, or maybe people just don't have the capacity. Especially as I get older, I realize people have kids, people have all sorts of things. They don't have time to pick up my phone call in the way that Nikole does if I'm having a bad day, right? Like not everyone can do that. And I think that I respect that. So I think what it is really finding your people and making sure that those people are the people that really love you and care about you. And I also, now that I'm mentoring young women, I've been sort of intentional about making sure that I don't have too many mentees so that I don't feel like I can't give people the support they need. I have one mentee who like reminds me of myself. She's constantly calling me, texting me. Like she's so smart. She's actually just is starting at a new paper, and I'm just so proud of her. But I also tell her, like, find people who really care about you and who will be there when you feel like you can't do this. I mean, I remember my first night anchoring Washington Week. I was like shaking. I brought my mom and my husband in, and they was like, "Oh, it's cute. She's bringing her family." And I was like, I needed like physical support, right? I was like, my mama and my husband just need to be here because I faint in this camera. They would carry me out the building if I can't anchor the show. So for me, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome as much as it's just like overwhelmed and it feels surreal that I'm here, because I think of just the fact that, like, again, my family came from Haiti. We were literally jailed by a dictator. Like, I could have not been born if things had gone a different way. So for me, I find it surreal that I'm sitting here and I'm questioning presidents, or I'm anchoring a show, especially because, I mean, Gwen Ifill, everyone, like, Washington Week is Gwen Ifill's. And I constantly tell myself, like, those are shoes you're never going to be able to fill. And you shouldn't even grasp to try to fill them, because she is her own person. And you have to just kind of embrace this and make it your own. So I don't know if it's imposter syndrome as much as it's like, okay, I just need to do the best that I can and not think of this as like screwing up Gwen's show. So I think I've definitely had the feeling where I'm like, okay, let me just try my best at this. I've never stacked a show before. I've never thought about how to write scripts in a way that's like, I'm going to be anchoring a show. So I think that I've really just tried to lean into, well, you had great women who poured into you, and now you have these great responsibilities, and embrace them. So for me, it's been a feeling of just like tapping myself on my shoulder and saying, like, yeah, you are here, you can do this. It's not so much because I always think about Michelle Obama's quote where she says, someone asked her, like, how did you feel sitting at those tables? And her answer was, you quickly realize people aren't as smart as they think they are. I think I've had that experience more than like imposter syndrome. It's been, how do I not make these people feel uncomfortable by saying, like, that's crazy, like that doesn't make any sense, right? So I think I've really just more had to navigate making sure to put people at ease with the fact that I want to be ambitious. I want to reach for the stars, and having people feel like that's okay, while also feeling like I'm not going to redo what other amazing women like Gwen and other people did.
Well, one of the things I appreciated about Gwen is she did get to a point where she would tell people to their face, "That's crazy. That makes no sense." And that was some of the things that I enjoyed the most.
I strive to get there.
Yeah, if I could just quickly speak on that. I also I don't feel imposter syndrome, but I do feel a tremendous, I mean, I know what it took for me to get where I am. I think most of us know what it took for us to get where we are. And you don't rise in our profession by not working hard as a Black woman. So I don't feel that, but I certainly have felt that my colleagues think I'm an imposter, and that my colleagues think I don't belong there, that I don't deserve to be there, or that I'm not good enough to be there. And again, the way that I deal with that is understanding, like, again, I know what it took for me to get here. I know what I can do. I tell young people this all the time. You can't control anything outside of yourself. You can't control how anybody sees you, how they'll perceive you, but you can control your own excellence. So I respond by, I'm not going to give you a reason. I'm going to be my best. I'm going to do the best work that I can do. And I think having a little bit of, a lot of humility, but a little bit of concern is what makes your work stronger, right? Is me always having in the back of my mind that they don't want me to be here. It can be debilitating if you let it, or it can be empowering because you're not going to prove them right. And it just, to me, makes you ensure that you are holding yourself to a high standard, that your work ethic is strong, that what you're ultimately producing is strong. But listen, if you are there, you belong to be there. You deserve to be there. You have not managed to fool everybody to let you in, even though they will want to make you feel that way. Don't let them make you feel that way.
This has been so much of a benediction, but I want to go around now and give each of you a chance to give us a closing thought. It can be whatever you would like it to be. It could be a charge, it could be a wish, whatever you would like. Is it Michelle? Do you want to start?
And I'll make this my charge. And your question that you just asked was timely, because I just was giving my own daughter advice about this, who called and said, I think I feel this imposter syndrome. I wonder if I'm smart enough to keep up with the pack. And what I told her, my initial reaction was to tell her what my mother used to tell me: just keep going. Did Harriet ever get tired? Just keep going. And I had to swallow that, because I realized, no, that's not what a young person needs to hear. So what I told her was, you're not expected to know everything, that you're there to learn. That's part of what being young means. So sop up as much knowledge as you can, but also know this: you make better every room you enter. that you bring something special to every room you enter. And even if you're feeling unsure of yourself as a young woman or later in your career, know that wherever you go, you bring something special to that room. And if you hold on to that little quiet voice that starts to ask, do I belong here? And as a young woman, you hear that voice will hopefully go away. And the last thing I want to say to Yamiche, you said that this is Gwen's show. Girl, that's your show now. And Gwen would be so proud of you. She applauds every Friday night when you sit in that chair.
Oh, thank
Truth.
you.
True, 100%. Nikole, will you give us, you've been dropping some nuggets along the way, as have all of this panel been dropping some knowledge and nuggets to us all. Nikole, do you want to give us a final thought, a charge, a benediction?
The only thing I would say is something I say all the time as well, which is, be for other people what you needed when you were trying to make it. Never be content to be the only one like you in the room. Someone helped clear a path for you, and we should all spend our time trying to clear paths for others.
Thank you. Karen, will you give us a closing thought, a benediction, a charge?
I think that I've been thinking a lot about purpose, and I'm very clear on my purpose. I think that I know that my experience and my life story adds something to the newsrooms that I've always been in, and that I accept and relish the responsibility of just existing, of just being here, is very important, and not losing faith, focusing on the work, thinking about how I can provide better reporting, better coverage, and then along the way, how can I include other people in that process? And that's what I've been doing the last couple of years, and I find a great deal of purpose in that. It fulfills me. It's fatiguing, but it fulfills me.
Karen, thank you. Yamiche, final thought, benediction, a charge?
I think the thing I would say is to find your people. And I think finding your people means finding people who will love and support you. 2020 for me was just probably the most difficult year of my life for all sorts of professional and personal reasons. And I think it helped me find my people and helped me figure out who I could be vulnerable with. And I was also a person for other people. So I think, we talk about mentorship, but I almost find it as just relationship and being human. When my mentee's feeling like she's overwhelmed, we just go for walks. It's not me giving her career advice as much as it's just me being like, it's okay for you to not be okay sometimes. So I think that that's kind of where I've landed in 2020 and 2021 is just this idea of empathy and this idea of being able to just have a sort of bubble of people around you, and create a bubble and be part of someone else's bubble so that you can actually not just get the job, but survive the job, survive the industry.
There's just so much more we could talk about. It's been such an honor and a privilege and a delight to spend this time with you today. Michele Norris, Nikole Hannah-Jones, Karen Toulon, Yamiche Alcindor. Find your people, know your purpose, keep the door open for other people, be excellent. What food for thought you've given us today. It's been truly a delight. Thank you so much. And thank you to the IWMF for bringing us together. And thank you to all who participated in this conversation. It's been a joy. Elisa, will you take us home?
Well, and thank you, Michelle, for leading such a distressing but also hopeful and inspiring conversation. It's just been full of so much great advice, and we did record the session, and we hope that you all will share it, and we certainly plan to, and take all of the nuggets of wisdom that you have so generously shared and spread them further. So thank you so very much to all of you for taking the time to join us. Please keep an eye on our next Press Freedom Speaker Series conversation. Follow the IWMF, sign up for our newsletter, stay in touch. We could not do this without you. So thank you all so very much for joining us. Have a great day.